to put that into perspective, the value of 1 hectare of forest is about $10,000 every year, while maize, which is maybe you are getting about 2 tons, the value is much lower than that. So now, the cost of that's arising from change of land use, land cover, is accounting for about 90% of the cost of land degradation of $65 billion. Now, there's also the cost which is coming from using land degrading management practices, like what we know always, not applying fertilizer, for example, and all that on cropland, which did not experience conversion to another land use. That also is a cost, and that we have taken into account. And also the grassland, the grazing lands. We also took that the grazing land. That's also contributing to land degradation. Now, this is a high cost, and people are aware, because the farmers are very dependent on the land, and they are noticing that there is that change. Why are they not taking action? We also computed the cost of taking action against land degradation. We found that if a farmer restores a degraded land, for each dollar that they invest, they get back $5. So meaning that the returns, the profit of taking action against land degradation is quite high. If you tell Warren Buffett that the stocks are giving you $5 to each dollar that you invest in, he's going to pour all the money into that. But why are the farmers not taking action? Some of the things that David Nielsen talked about, the lack of information, the market failures, are the ones which are contributing to this the inaction that we are seeing happening. So I'm running out of time. Maybe we will have some questions at the very end, in which I would like to give some of the sort of good picture of what we have seen. This sounds a very gloomy picture, but there are some countries which have taken action, and that action has worked. But because I want to respect JJ, I want to end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ephraim, to sticking to the time and giving such useful insights here. So I don't want to repeat your statement. You will probably have more opportunity during the audience discussion to make more remarks, and depending on the questions we will get from the audience. And we have seen already some of the questions coming. But a key important probably takeaway message here, I have colleagues taking notes from this discussion. You've really mentioned about the cost of land degradation. And you gave a figure of $65 billion per year. It's tremendous. Leaving alone the cost of taking action, which you also mentioned as you were closing your remarks. So let me move now to the next speaker, and this is going to be Professor John Kelly. Professor John Kelly teaches pedology and is the Deputy Director for Colorado Agricultural Experimental Station at Colorado State University. Prof. Kelly conducts research and lectures on various aspects of soils as related to global change issues. His current research is centered on global soil degradation and fundamental role of grasslands in global biogeochemical cycles. He is a member of the US National Committee for Soil Science with National Academy of Science. You can read more from the bio posted on the platform with regards to Prof. Kelly. Now, Prof. Kelly, could you give us, as a follow-up discussion to what Ephraim has just discussed, an overview of the environmental issues at stake as we consider the degraded state of African soil into the future? Over to you, Prof. You also have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for those remarks. Both Ephraim and David laid out, I think, the framework for discussing the environmental implications of soil degradation. As we all know, one of the major threats that we have now is climate change. And what we've known as a scientific community is we've identified the soil as a critical sort of aspect of mitigating and also adapting to our changing climate. We know this is globally significant. Major aspects from the environmental perspective are things like soil erosion, where we've lost 50% of our topsoil over the last 100 to 150 years. Africa estimates around 45 to 50% of the topsoil has been lost due to erosion. As Ephraim pointed out earlier, that the degradation is actually much more broadly recognized as not just fertility. There are other aspects of the ecosystem services which are diminished, such as water quality, air quality, salinity, compaction. These are all things that further degrade the soil system with the use of agriculture, misuse of agricultural practices. And so those are sort of the major, things we think about in terms of the environmental aspects. You'll hear a lot about carbon over the next 10 to 20 years, about the importance of carbon and how that might be monetized, and how the soil might be an important element, or an important player in that. But what we do know from the scientific standpoint, and I'll finish here and then talk about future things, is the soils are a critical aspect from a planetary perspective. They are the biological buffer between climate change and the way we live. And so the soils need to be performing optimally, and we need to be able to recognize those. We have a lot of scientific information, and some of the challenges are the levels of degradation. Has the soil reached a tipping point where it can come back? Are there soils that are better adapted to certain types of practices to regenerate them? Looking at regenerative activities in soils and regenerative agriculture as broadly defined across many aspects of the agricultural system. So those are really sort of key things that we look at in terms of the soils, and identifying the level of degradation and strategically looking at those soils, and strategically using our soils, using soils for livestock production versus crop production. Those decisions need to be made based on the degradation and the potential of the soil to recover from degradation or be resilient to degradation. So it's not about just degrading soils, but it's about looking at resiliency of soils and the soil system to degradation. I think moving ahead and looking, more to the future, I think David pointed out very well the idea of inventory. There's been an enormous amount of inventory done, but this needs to be ratcheted up. In other words, what that means is we need to really do an aggregation of what's been done at the local scale, the regional scale, and the continental scale. There's a lot of technology available to soil scientists and earth system scientists to do that. We look at the evaluation of these resources and how they can be evaluated quantitatively, looking at different aspects of the soil system, water quality, water holding capacity, nutrients, etc. But I think what really becomes more evident to me is when we start looking at the soil health issue globally, or the soil degradation issue globally, is this idea of not only the strategic utilization of soils, but the participatory aspects of it, that we need to have farmers engaged, we need managers engaged, we need policy people engaged, and this needs to be vertically integrated by scale, from local all the way up to regional or continental. And I think what I would like to sort of emphasize is this idea, and I think the opportunity here to really look at assessments and implementation. If it's not implemented, it doesn't matter what we do. We have to be able to implement it. We have to make it economically viable to implement. We need to make it operationally viable to implement. So that takes a lot of boots on the ground. It takes a lot of what we call extension activities, and also the various aspects of engagement. So I look forward to further discussions this morning. Thank you all for inviting me. And again, thanks for the opening remarks. And I think I only have about 20 seconds or so. So I think I'll close there and wait for other questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. Kelly. This was really very insightful. You've mentioned one more important statement here, saying that soil is our biological buffer, and we have by all means tried to avoid reaching the tipping point. I like that. That's extremely important as far as this discussion is concerned. Now, before I move to the next speaker, I can see from the chat room that some colleagues who are Francophone or French speakers are struggling to get interpretation. So can you use the interpretation icon, which is on the bottom right side of your Zoom portal? Si vous cliquez sur l'icône du globe, ça va vous choisissez le français et le système va vous amener directement à l'interprète qui fait la traduction en français. Now, on this note, let me move to our next speaker, and it's equally interesting. And this is Dr. Lisel Weiss. Dr. Lisel Weiss, again, you have seen probably her profile from the platform, is a South African soil scientist who spent 10 years as a soil science researcher at the National Agricultural Research Council in South Africa. She became an international consultant in 2016 and spent 20 years working for the Global Soil Partnership, Secretariat of FAO's headquarters in Rome, Italy, where she chaired the Global Soil Partnership Pillar working groups to increase sustainable soil management and targeted soil research, and also helped facilitated activities under the African Soil Partnership. Dr. Weiss, you have worked with the Global Soil Partnership and also the Africa Soil Partnership. What do these partnerships offer as building blocks based on the presentation made by David for a soil initiative for Africa? And what else might be needed for the successes of such an initiative? Is it human capital, extension systems? What are the solutions? You know, is it pillar 2 on education or other pillars of the Global Soil Partnership? Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the participants. And let me start by saying that I'm not speaking on behalf of the Global Soil Partnership or representing it, but rather I'm giving an outside perspective of what I see as the building blocks that exist and the opportunities that are arising within the discussion that we're having now. So one of the major strengths of the Global Soil Partnership, incidentally, Ms. Zineb Baza, who is currently with the Global Soil Partnership and coordinating Pillar 1, provided links in the chat box at 5:23 p.m., also mentioning her colleagues, where you can link to find more information on the Global Soil Partnership. So first of all, it's a very well-established platform that links to all the 194 Food and Agriculture Organization countries, mainly through the Ministries of Agriculture, and it has national focal points in most countries. So the network is well established, and the link with governments is very well established, which is important. In terms of products developed, there are so many, so I just want to highlight some of the key points that I think are relevant for an initiative like this. And first of all is that a number of normative instruments have been developed to guide especially governments and countries on how to approach sustainable management of soil towards increased soil health, like the voluntary guidelines on sustainable soil management, and more recently, a code of conduct for sustainable use and management of fertilizers. And again, these kind of normative documents are endorsed by the FAO's Committee on Agriculture and also the FAO conference, so they carry political weight. Then in terms of what an initiative actually wants to address, the Global Soil Partnership has looked at the extent and the main issues in terms of the 10 main soil threats that threaten healthy soils. And a lot of the work subsequently done looks at how those 10 threats can be addressed. So there are many aspects linked to soil information, capacity development, research, investment, etc. So there are extensive networks linked to global soil information, for example, soil laboratories. The African Soil Laboratory Network has been established recently. It also links research in soil research to policy, which I think is something that has been fairly new, which happens especially through the global symposiums that are hosted on the topics of the 10 soil threats. So far there's been a global symposium on soil organic carbon, soil pollution, soil erosion, etc. But many of these things are happening kind of at the top in terms of developing guidelines and a framework through which various partners can address soil health. So more recently, some newer tools that were developed, I think, will bring this closer to the land users or the farmers, whereas essentially where the change needs to happen, because the farmers are the people that actually need to manage the soil and improve the soil health. So this is, for example, the recarbonization of soil, or the REC soil program, and the Global Soil Doctors program. I'll say a little bit more about them next. But first, this links for me to what is missing in general in Africa to improve soil health in terms of human capital and extension. As David mentioned, myself and a colleague, Dr. Andrei Rozanov from University of Stellenbosch, did a study in 2018 for the World Bank and Eurasian Center for Food Security. And we mostly looked at soil scientists trained in Africa. So the assessment of extension officers did not receive so much attention. But what I want to highlight is that at the higher level of education, which also relates to higher investment in that education, longer time to train soil scientists, etc., we can say there are between 4,000 and 12,000 trained soil scientists in Africa. And if we look at that in terms of soil scientists to the population, it's more or less 0.4 to 15 soil scientists per million people. And many people feel that we need more soil scientists. If we look at agricultural extension, the feeling is generally that extension services are not sufficient in terms of soil knowledge and training. And there are also other challenges, for example, the extension to farmer ratio, the distances that extension officers have to travel to get to farmers, and many other challenges. So for me, what this boils down to is that we really need to focus more on the farmers and providing direct access of information to them. And this is where I feel, for example, the Soil Doctors program has a lot of potential, because it basically turns farmers into extension officers, not to replace extension officers, but to provide a next level link between extension officers and communities. And when we consider investing in human capital, you know, we look at this value in terms of monetary investment, but also the skills and the knowledge and the experience of the individuals. But what we also need to look at is the change in people's perception of their own sense of being valuable. And this has to be linked somehow to livelihoods, and also creating income for people to increase their sense of being valuable. So I want to finish off by saying that when we look at building human capital, it's not only about investing to increase the value of people, but also to increase people's perception of being valuable and being empowered. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weiss, for your message, and also making reference to some of the best practices from the Global Soil Partnership. I've also seen from the chat room that colleagues from FAO who have joined this session have shared links to some other useful information which will probably complement the talking point you just delivered. Thank you very much. So I encourage all the speakers to keep looking at the chat rooms. There are several questions coming. Some of you have already started, responding live to the participant, but we'll also have an opportunity to discuss some of the remaining questions in the next session of a plenary discussion. But at this point, allow me now to move to the next speaker, and this is Dr. Jofre Henrich. He works currently with the Catholic Relief Services. Jof started his professional career conducting field research on watershed management and systems in India. Subsequently, he spent 20 years conducting on-farm farming systems research with smallholder farmers in Southern Africa. First as an associate professor for Kansas State University, then as a scientist and senior program manager with the International Crop Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, ICRISAT. Jof joined CRS in 2004, and since then he has been providing technical advice to country program and working to develop improved programming approaches for rural livelihoods. Dr. Henrich, you and the Catholic Relief Services have had a lot of experience working directly with farmers and communities to address food security and key agricultural and livelihood challenges. Your success, working on soil health at both farm and landscape levels has led CRS to prioritize scaling soils and land restoration as a key pillar of its new 2030 strategy. Can you please describe some of the things needed to help these local successes to scale? Over to you, Jeff.
Well, thank you very much, Jean-Jacques. That's an extremely important one. First, I'd just like to emphasize, as some of the other panel members have done, that soil health is really the foundation of rural livelihoods. And without addressing soil health, no other agricultural technologies, including improved varieties and commercial fertilizers, will be very effective in increasing productivity. Worldwide, the soils are degrading quite rapidly, and this trend, we really need to reverse it urgently if we're going to end rural poverty and food and water insecurity. So it's for this reason that CRS has prioritized land restoration, and particularly soil restoration, in our 2030 strategy. But in regards to in regards to scaling, the first critical point that I'd like to mention is that, and Lisel alluded to this, is that rural households and communities are really the ultimate custodians of the soil and the environment. And if we want systems change, which is what we're really after, then we need to ensure that rural households are really part of the process. And that means that rural households and communities in targeted areas need to be directly involved both in the design and the implementation of the management plans. And they also need to see clear benefits, both immediate benefits and longer term benefits in terms of income or food and water security from the management plans that they're implementing. So our work has shown that rural households and communities can experience real benefits in as little as 1 to 2 agricultural seasons. And those benefits are critically important if we want the gains in soil restoration to be sustained. A second point on scaling is that we have demonstrated that we are able to support rural households and communities to manage soil and water effectively. However, working only in a project format has meant that our successes have been somewhat localized. And if we want to systematically scale, then we need to connect those project initiatives to initiatives that are beyond those project boundaries. And so for scaling within a country, for example, we need strong collaboration and commitment from governments, with the private sector, with the research and training institutions, and development partners and donors. And the role of civil society and NGOs is important, but is often less well understood, particularly in regards to soil restoration. But civil society can play a very important role in mobilizing communities and promoting positive behavior change, which are actually both quite complex processes. Civil society can also really help a lot in terms of diffusing information and augmenting government capacity building efforts at multiple levels. And civil society organizations often have deep connections with communities that allow us to act as honest brokers, facilitating collaboration across multiple stakeholders at the local level. And I would just like to add on, while we're talking about sort of stakeholders in the process, is that collaboration amongst all of these stakeholders is recommended and very much aligned with the recommendations of the CADEP non-state actors guidelines, which I think is a very well-written document. My last point on scaling, as Jean Kelly mentioned, that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to soil restoration. Instead, approaches are very location and context specific, even in different areas within the same country. So because the soil issues are so variable, and because you need so many partners to work together, and the collaboration is really important, it may be very useful at a country level to identify one or more kind of representative locations within the country where the different partners that all need to work together can meet with the local communities and all together co-develop effective and location-specific approaches. You can think of a different names for those types of locations. I like to think of them as scaling laboratories. But there would be centers of continuous and collaborative innovation and learning. And then from those scaling labs, the relevant partners and stakeholders, which might actually include rural community households and members, could work to scale out proven and effective approaches. And I think this type of collaboration would give us practical and effective approaches to land and soil restoration at national level. That would give us approaches that were owned and supported by all the key stakeholders. And it would be pretty much ensure that the interventions were also practical for communities to adopt. So in summary, for scaling, we would need, I think at a minimum, the direct involvement and participation of rural households and communities, strong collaboration among diverse stakeholders, preferably following the CADEP non-state actors guidelines. We would need, I think, locations where all the stakeholders could collaboratively innovate and co-create local solutions, and then have an agreed strategy among the partners working together to scale those technologies out to relevant places within the country where they would be effective. I think if we had all those four components put together, we'd have a good start on scaling at a country level, at least. So thank you, Jean-Jacques, and ladies and gentlemen, appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much for keeping on time and also for sharing CRS's experience on scaling successful interventions, at least from a civil society point of view, working with smallholder farmers in different parts of the world. This is very useful. So I encourage again the speakers to keep reading through the chat room. There are several questions coming from the participant, and we may probably not have time to address all of them, but keep responding to those that are coming directly using the same chat box. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me now to move to the next panelist, and this is Dr. Jerry Glover from the USA. Jerry Glover is a National Geographic Society explorer and the acting deputy director for USAID's Center for Agricultural-Led Growth. He earned undergraduate degree in soil science and philosophy and a doctoral degree in soil science from Washington State University. Jerry is an elected fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the Soil Science Society of America, the American Society of Agronomy, and the Crop Science Society of America. You can read more about Jerry in the short profile posted on the platform. Now, Dr. Glover, USAID is one of a number of Africa's development partners that have supported efforts to improve soil health. What can Africa's development partners do to support an initiative to scale up such efforts? You've heard from Jeff and other previous speakers. Can you share with us your ideas on this particular question? Over to you, Dr. Glover.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques, and thank you for having me participate in this important panel today. And then thanks for the question. We are very pleased to be working with a number of partners on soils initiatives. Where I sit within USAID is in the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, and certainly resilience starts with soil, and soil is obviously the foundation for food security. So it really is a fundamental issue within the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security. Certainly as the health of a farmer's soils declines, so too does her resilience in the face of droughts, floods, other extreme weather events, including pest outbreaks. Now, unfortunately, today's African farmers are working with probably the thinnest, most nutrient depleted soils in Africa's long agricultural history. And so, as everyone before me today, and more eloquently has stated, we have to turn this around. So 3 things that I think USAID and other development partners need to be involved and engaged on is 1, prioritization, 2, coordination and alignment of the efforts, and 3, participate in African-led efforts. So on the prioritization, here at USAID, we've organized our core soil research investments within a consortium of partners with expertise from policy, socioeconomics, and biophysical sciences, as well as capacity development, that's led by the International Fertilizer Development Center. We call that the Sustainable Opportunities for Increasing the Livelihoods with Soils. So it ranges from a focus on soil health and relates it to the livelihoods of people on the ground. One thing that we've done with that Soils Consortium is identify the top 3 or so issues facing key production systems that if we can overcome them, it'll result in the greatest benefit across large regions. So as Jeff pointed out, many projects traditionally are very project focused, locally influential. We need to get beyond that, and that's what we're attempting to do with the Soils Consortium. The second issue around coordination and alignment of efforts, we see the Soils Consortium not as the sort of global leader platform, but as a global partner platform by which we can organize our own investments to better partner with and in a more efficient manner with other initiatives. Because, again, as people have pointed out, there are many challenges and the many organizations within the international development community working on these tends to create a patchwork of successes that are localized. So pulling together around a few key challenges that we can overcome over the long term, I think will be critical. The third issue, though, and really makes me pleased to see this session come together to prioritize and overcome the daunting challenges pointed out today. It really does require the leadership of those closest to the issues and the most at stake, such as the range of African institutions represented here today. So, this is a great beginning of a much longer conversation, but an African-led initiative, it's most likely to succeed. It's going to be the most attractive to gain the support of a wide range of development partners, both at the international level as well as at the national research and extension system level. And again, you know, we've worked over the past few years to better organize and develop a better focus for our research investments that we have from USAID. But again, we see that as setting up a good partner for an African-led initiative or a series of initiatives, depending on how it works out. So again, I think you know, the very valid points pointed out before around prioritization, coordination is right on, and the people that need to lead this, lead our way forward, are those partners involved here today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jerry. I think there's someone speaking in the background. If you can just mute the mic, we will have time for interactions shortly. So Jerry, you've mentioned, I believe the keywords as far as support from the development partners is concerned. And these are prioritization, coordination, alignment to an Africa's own plan. So this is extremely important, and I believe you will get more comment from the audience. At this point, let me move to the last but not least speaker before we jump into a plenary discussion. And ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Yemi Akinbamijo. Dr. Yemi has been the executive director for FARA, the Forum for Agricultural Research in Africa, since 2013. Prior to joining FARA, Dr. Akinbamijo held several leadership positions at the African Union Commission over 8 years period. Dr. Akinbamijo spent the earlier years of his career working as a hands-on scientist on crop livestock integrated systems, research at Wageningen University, University of Edinburgh, and the West African Livestock Innovation Center in the Gambia. Yemi is very passionate about processes for translation of research outcomes into livelihood impact. Again, you can read more from Yemi's bio from the platform. Dr. Akinbamijo, in your work at FARA, you support collaboration and priority setting of Africans' agricultural research, education, and even extension programs. Would this community of practice embrace a soil initiative for Africa? And how would you go about mobilizing African institutions to take on this challenge, which the previous speakers have already unpacked? Over to you, Yemi.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean-Jacques. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to make some contribution at this very, very important virtual gathering around soils on our dear continent. Well, let me allude and associate myself with the statements and sentiments that have been expressed before me, and I am particularly intrigued by what Jerry said, that we really do need an Africa-led initiative. We need to, put this in the front burners on the continent. And why is this becoming so crucial? Starting from what my dear brother Ephraim said, and I really felicitate your position and the great work you have done. 80% of the workforce on our continent depends on agriculture. And what that means is that these 80% depend on soil, because everything, whether you are aquaculture or pastoralist or an agronomist, you must somehow touch the soil. So we know it that soils is the heart of agriculture. And we also know that there is a declining per capita arable land on the continent, because soil is really a finite resource. Now, that said, I mean, because I put this on the scale to see how much of the continent's population have their livelihood directly hinged on the integrity of our soils. And if you dig deeper, you understand that it becomes imperative that maintaining the soils is the same thing as maintaining livelihoods. And if you just take a look how many ecological migrants we have, when you look at the pastoralists in the Sahel, the pastoralists in all the livestock dependent communities, many people have migrated because the integrity of the soils have been compromised. So everything depends on the integrity of the soil. Now, what is the African plan? Now, Jean-Jacques, you're asking me, what would the community of practice, would they embrace soils initiative? If we neglect it to our own peril. But I'm sure that initiatives like this, a forum like this, can only help to further sensitize the stakeholders across the value chains why we need to recognize that we have to maintain a healthy soil integrity. I'm just going to speak on 3 or 4 minor points and then I'll close. So the first is that we need to mobilize Africa for a soils initiative. So far, there's been a lot of expression of goodwill. Many people come to the continent to help us, but not enough to do everything at the same time to instigate a wholesale soil degradation check. So you find some donors come, they do a pocket, some donor agencies, some development partners, they do this in bits and pieces. And one of the very good works that I have seen, there was a 10-year program about soil health that happened some time ago. And all of these bits and pieces are around the continent. But unless we have the facility that can mobilize Africa and Africans for the soils initiative, initiatives like the Agenda 2063, Malabo, CISA, SDG, they will fail. So the second point I also want to say is that FARA has led and the SROs, of course, the sub-regional organizations, we've been pushing the science agenda for agriculture in Africa. On the panel today, we have pedologists, we have all sorts of people dealing with different arms of soil science. And what that tells us is that we cannot check soil degradation without good science. So we need to see what opportunities we have to align with all these initiatives and have them streamlined in a way that people can use them and use it for the advancement of good livelihoods. Then aligning these with other challenges, in other words, not just a silo approach, we need to have a package of all the challenges, because if we do not deal with it in a heterogeneous manner, the solutions will fail, because you need a heterogeneous solution for a heterogeneous challenge or problem. So we need to see how we pull all of this together. And FARA and its constituents members, we are in a good position to actually see how we can facilitate all of this in the context of the science agenda for agriculture in Africa. So the last point is that we need to inventorize all the good works, what I call the low-hanging fruits or technologies that can help us put a check on this very disturbing scenario. So when we are able to have all these inventory of all this great work that's been done on the continent, we will be in a position to prioritize and see now what needs to be scaled and by whom, where, and how. So these for me are my pennyworth ideas on how I think we can make our community of practice to embrace the Soils Initiative for Africa, and how we will manage to mobilize the constituencies. Back to you, Jean-Jacques, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yemi. Hold on, I will come back to you shortly. But at this point, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you to our next stage, which is an audience discussion. I'm sure you must have had an opportunity to look through the chat room with several comments, questions that came from the audience and the participants. And thank you to Ephraim and others who have taken the opportunity to respond to some of these questions directly using the chat room. But we have 15 minutes for plenary discussion. We're going to proceed like this. I will pick a few questions directed to the panelists from the list of comments we got in the chat room. And then I will give 2 minutes to each of the panelists to make complementary comments, mainly referring to some of the questions that came from the audience. There are several of them, and we can't probably handle all of them in the given time, the 15 minutes. Now, Yemi, as I was just asking you to hold on, there's a question here from Chris Warler, which I want you to follow up on as you still have the floor. I'm sure if you got a chance to look at that, but I will just read it for you. So Chris is saying like this: in the face of the strong demand for science-based options in agriculture, Africa has a lot of technologies on the shelves that are yet to be translated into socio-economic benefit for the stakeholders in the sector. This is a social irony. So what is your say on this, Dr. Yemi? One minute.
Thank you very much, Jean-Jacques. Yeah.
Yeah, 1 minute, please.
1 minute.
Yeah.
Well, and let me thank the Chris who is raising this question. The irony there is that Africa has the largest reserve of natural resources. And Africa is not short of young, vibrant youth hands that can help in using these technologies. But yet, we are speaking today in the 21st century of an Africa that is bedeviled with a degraded soil. So the irony is this: how could a continent like this, I mean, this is like the Ethiopian proverb that the son of the Nile is thirsty. How could the continent like this, so much resources, but so much in want? This is a social irony that needs to be reversed. But this irony will only respond to science. And it is possible. It is possible. It's happened before in many places, and we can still do it in Africa. Thank you, JJ.
Thank you very much, Yemi. Now, as I said, let me move to the other speakers, probably one after another, starting by Prof. Kelly. So there's a question that came from a participant called Mel Landers. And he or she is asking if, he is saying that, is there a focus on rewetting agricultural soils through rainwater harvest? You know, dry soils support less photosynthesis and therefore permit less storage of soil carbon. Would you love to make a comment on this, Prof?
Sure. I mean, that's a really, really good point. I think that, again, when we look at this, this sort of assessment or this, this sort of the level of degradation, when we have soils anywhere on the planet that are not, or lose the capacity to hold water, they're almost at a tipping point. I mean, they're almost to the point where they might not be, quote unquote, recoverable for use. Now, I mean, that doesn't mean that it can't be done, but that would require perhaps an energy intensive sort of way of doing that, or a shift in the use of that land. And so one of the things that I think becomes important is that you know, those other sort of quote unquote ecosystem properties that Efren had talked about earlier become really vital. You know, it's not just a fertility issue. It's much broader than that, particularly based on the livelihoods of people that work with livestock, forestry, you know, water quality and those issues. So yeah, so that I'm not specifically aware of that major issue, but the idea of wetting soils, yeah, absolutely is important. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Kelly. I'm now moving to Jofre. There is a participant, I'm sure you must have seen that from the chat room, in the name of Pius Asante. And this is a question on which Ephraim has already made a comment, but I want to hear from your perspective. He's saying, very interesting conversation. How can we get the voices of family farmers and women and the youth into the conversation, you know, to get their voices heard? What is your experience engaging these categories of farmers, you know, from the work you did in India, in Southern Africa, and other parts of the world? Over to you, and you have 1 minute to comment on this, Geoff.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think the short answer is that we need to get better at doing farmer participatory research, because that's a way of giving them a direct voice. Oftentimes, that's the first thing that gets cut when there are budget shortages, but I think it's the most crucial one, because particularly for soils, you know, different farmers, even in the same village, will have different capacity to implement different solutions. And unless we have the participation, one reason that I think technologies sit on the shelf so long is because we haven't done it, and they may not be appropriate, or yeah, they haven't got the right intervention or inputs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jofre. Now, let me use this opportunity for the remaining 5 minutes to give the floor to Lisel. You must have seen some messages dropped by, you know, participants from FAO and others. Any other final remark from your side, Lisel? Back to you.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. Yes, yes, I saw that there was quite a bit of information dropped in terms of the information that is available. And I want to comment in general about the capacity and the knowledge and the research that already exists in Africa and also globally. I also saw a question about why is Africa not utilizing its expertise in diaspora. I can't answer that directly, but what I do want to stress is that we do have a lot of excellent soil scientists and agriculturalists in Africa. And I think from an investment perspective, we need to use this local capacity a lot more and recognize them and also invest in them more. And another important point that I want to make is that I think we need to look at what is it that we actually want to achieve in terms of improving soil health. What does that actually mean for farmers on the ground? For example, do we want to take farmers with 0.5 to 2 to 5 hectares of land to increase their crop production from 0.5 ton or 1 ton or 2 tons per hectare of maize or other crops to the regional or global standards of 5 or 6 or 10 tons per hectare? Or do we want to build a process of working with farmers and teaching them to make adaptive decisions based on day-to-day changes and challenges and seasonal changes, and also changes related to changing climate? So I would like to see an initiative following a phased approach where I really believe we have enough research, enough information, enough good practices. As some comments also stated, there are some practices on the shelf that are not being implemented in Africa. We have enough information to get a lot of farmers from very marginal production to at least a production level where they can start generating an income or having at least household food security. Then there's a second level where once farmers reach a higher level, they then need additional research to further customize practices for their area, have more improved weed control or pest control, water usage, and so on. So I think these points are very important. And I even want to go as far as to say Africa needs to recognize Africa's potential and existing expertise. And
Thank you,
I
Lisel.
fully
Thank you. We're running
Thanks.
out of time. But I appreciate your comments. You can probably even drop more messages on the chat box. I want to use my 2 last minutes before we move into the closing session to give a chance to Jerry. You know, there are questions which tend to ask to focus on household engagement. How do you ensure that USAID programs and intervention are inclusive? You can use a minute, Jerry, maybe to make a comment on that, or any other point you picked from the chat room.
Sure. Well, certainly with our central soil research investments, we try to ensure inclusiveness at a number of levels, particularly, as Jeff pointed out, through participatory action research. I think we support some of the most expert thinkers on participatory action research, and that helps ensure that a full range of voices, not just on gender, but also on the often ethnic differences that are in communities, relatively resource rich versus relatively resource poor. And so having the research embedded within the lives and livelihoods of the farmers who we hope will benefit from our investments, we do try to ensure that type of inclusiveness. It's not easy, you know, it's not easy, and certainly we can always, I think, do better. But I think that, you know, that direct participation with farmers to identify the challenges and how to overcome them really does help. One problem with that, though, one issue that can lead to, though, is very localized project-based efforts. So somehow we have to balance the inclusivity that's needed at the ground level, on the farm and community level, with a well-developed set of priorities by which we can impact large areas relatively early on. If we don't stack those prioritization efforts right, and I think that's a bit of what Lisel was getting to in this phased approach, we can't continue a patchwork of project-based activities to really achieve the top-level issues. But we can't only look at the highest level, because then we're at risk of not benefiting the intended farm communities the way that we want, through inclusivity, through outcomes on livelihoods such as poverty and malnutrition. So it needs to be a balance, and but we do need prioritization so that we're not working on 100 different things through 100 different projects. I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Jean-Jacques.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you very much for those remarks. Lastly, before we jump into the last part of this session, I'm back to you, Ephraim. I'm sure you're looking from the chat, and there's one very last question from somebody called Sebastian Brahen. And I'd encourage you, probably as you've been doing, to respond to this using the chat room. He's saying that most politicians are not scientists. So we need scientists to infiltrate the governments in order to influence policy and decision making. I think this speaks again to the political economy, which is one of the other questions that came to you earlier on. I give you 5 seconds, and then you can drop a response to Sebastian using the chat room. But let me give you a chance to speak for a few seconds.
Because they are not scientists, we have to hit them where it hurts. Tell them the cost of land degradation to the economy. And if they hear that they are losing that much, they're gonna listen. Secondly, we also need to inform them. We need to inform some of them that are ignorant. They don't know the cost of land degradation, and that when we tell them this is the cost and this is what is costing you.
Thank you, Ephraim. So that's very important. You can drop more, comments on the chat room. Now, at this point, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite my colleague Anthony Eguru from Reforum. You can read about Anthony from the platform. Just to summarize the session, using bullet point for 2 minutes, and then we hand over the floor to our chief guest from the African Union Commission, Dreyer, to deliver the closing statements. Anthony, 2 minutes, and we will have a chance actually to report back during the week, and we shall share with the participants the proceedings. Over to you. 2 minutes, Anthony.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, JJ. I pointed out, listened and keyed in a few key issues, which I summarize as 8 key issues. From
Anthony, we can't hear you.
Also coming out from the vital foundations, and these are,
Anthony, your system is on and off. Let me suggest that, Anthony, we move to the closing remarks by Dr. Simplis as you organize your notes, which we will actually share the report with the participants and the speakers. So the 5 remaining minutes, we're going to use it and invite Dr. Simplis Nwala from the African Union Commission. Dr. Simplis is the head of division for agriculture and food security, and he will deliver both closing remarks, but also a call to action. Simplis, over to you, and we have 5 minutes to close.
Thank you very much, Jean-Jacques. Good afternoon again. Allow me to provide my closing remarks in 7 bullet points before the call to action. The first is that the second biennial review report of the CADEP revealed that out of 49 countries that submitted their report, only 4 were on track or are on track to meeting the Malabo commitment of 2025. 1 is on track of ending hunger by 2025, and only 9 have reported increasing yield in their national commodity above the 30% target that we set for the second review. The second point is that decline in soil health and fertility is widespread across the continent, and this decline poses serious challenges to food security, agricultural livelihoods, water management, climate change, and environment. Third, many of the building blocks for solution already exist in terms of technical information, financial mechanism, human capital, and institutional environment. However, despite numerous and notable successes at local level, pragmatic efforts to address the problems at scales have been fragmented and inadequate. I think Dr. Yemi did alluded to this. Africa's soil problem persists and deepens at the great cost. Among it, we can mention soil erosion, loss of organic matter, nutrient deficiency, imbalance, loss of biodiversity. More importantly, soil health, threatened food and nutrition security, and viability of agriculture as a livelihood, and also threatens peace and political stability on the continent. Improving the health of Africa's soil depends on practical actions at field levels. Most African farmers require technical advice to complement their own know-how in determining how best to manage their soil. By working together, the institutions that co-organize these important sessions, I will mention FARA, Reform, the African Forum for Agricultural Advisory Services, ZARECA, CORAF, CADESA, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, the Colorado State University, and the Catholic Relief Services, in collaboration with the private sector, the development partners, the regional economic communities, and the African Union, can play a leading role in addressing soil fertility in the continent. Of course, they have to build and deepen collaboration with already existing and successful programs, such as the African Soil Information Service, the African Soil Partnership, and the Global Soil Partnership and the Soil Program, just to mention those. As a call for action, we all agree that sustainably and inclusively increasing agricultural productivity is central to improving the performance of the agricultural sector, and the Malabo Declaration visions to have agricultural-led transformation and development in Africa. Therefore, Africa needs a much expanded, more coordinated effort to address soil problems at scale. This will require leadership, planning, collaboration, and resources. It will need to build upon the institutional landscape already existing. To this end, the African Union Commission commits to supporting a consultative process across the spectrums of stakeholders to assess the successes of existing soil initiatives, as well as the missing ingredients and potential challenges to take those successes to scale. We commit to acting on the results of this process to chart a roadmap to action with prioritized and co-creations of solutions designed for practical applications and ease of uptake by those most affected. We commit to bring to the attention of the agricultural ministers in charge of agriculture, rural development, water and environment, and later on to the head of state summit, the importance of investment in soil health for Africa to deliver the continent food and nutrition security, to deliver a strong recognition of Africa food systems, and enable successful realization of the science agenda for agriculture in Africa. Finally, the sponsors of these events, that is the cadet ex-peer institutions and development partners, are planning a follow-up session that will take place at the World Food Prize Ballroom Dialogues event early October this year. With this, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simplis. I want to thank everyone. I'm told that our time is over. I really appreciate the contributions by our speakers, participants. I commit from the team of organizers who will compile a report and share with the participants, and where possible address the remaining comments through written document. On this note, I don't want to exceed more time. I wish you a good evening, a good morning, a good day, and looking forward to engaging more with you throughout this week in different sessions by AGRF 2020. Thank you very much.
Jean-Jacques.
Have a lovely day and evening. Bye-bye.
Bye, Janja.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Just